Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We are going to wrap up this week with an album review as we usually do, where we check out each song from an album, uh, analyzing what it's doing in isolation and what its place is in the larger artwork. Had a total moment there where I can't think of what to say. Today we have something interesting by a lot of metrics, I suppose. First of all, it is on the shorter side at only 37 minutes, and there's only 7 tracks, and half of them are in the interlude length. There really is only 3, maybe 4 main tracks on this album. So that's a bit unusual too. I think this is only going to be in the 2-hour range rather than the usual 3-hour range of most album reviews. Beyond that though, I actually know a little bit of the context of the title of the artist name, and I looked up a little bit about what's going on with the album name as well. So the band we're looking at is Black Kirin. And a Kirin is a mythological beast in some Asian cultures that typically appears at the birth or death of important people in history, sages and rulers and stuff like that. A Black Kirin, I suppose, would be someone who shows up at times of negativity, like the opposite of prosperity, when an important person is coming in for negative reasons, would be how I interpret a Black Kirin. The album name is Nanking Massacre, and I looked this up. Nanking is actually the original, old romanization of the name of this city. Now we typically refer to it as Nanjing. But there was a massacre that occurred there when Japan was at war with China. And a lot of Chinese people were murdered that day, including prisoners of war. So, I'm not expecting this to be a very happy or positive album at all. Both the band name and the album name, I'm assuming heavy topics. So, let's dive into this. The first track, as you can see, like I said, interlude length. Most of these go, odd numbers are interlude length, even numbers are long ones. So we're going to listen to tracks 1 and 2 together. It's over 11 minutes in length. Let's dive in, see what's going on with 1937 and the song. All right, so we have sirens. More of like an alarm, though. Oh, you can already feel the melancholy in those opening 3 chords. Was that like a tuba, or was that a sample of like an airplane going overhead? Well, they don't flow directly into each other. Interesting choice. And more beautifully melancholic composition. Again, just from a couple of notes, you can already feel the weight. Immediately getting into those emotional themes. could be wrong here, but I'm pretty sure I hear some traditional Chinese instruments on here. There's definitely some stringed sounds, both pluck and bowed, that I'm not completely familiar with. I think this is the first purely metal section that we've heard. I mean, and that's like a pretty stereotypical death metal riff on the guitars too, so. Three different harsh vocals layered. Okay, we're in 7. Now we're in 4. Keep throwing me off there. I'm starting to sweat. This music is really effective. I think that was a whistle tone scream, no? A little bit of a tempo boost to really feel the intensity increase here. Very jagged rhythmic element underneath all of this. Yeah. Okay. I really hope the rest of the album is like this, and I have great faith that it will be. Most bands don't start out with something like this and then shift gears too dramatically. Top that off with there only being two and a half more tracks ahead of us, and I expect consistency. This was phenomenal. This is what I really want metal to do more often. And that's not to say like the more traditional metal stuff is bad in any way. I feel less connected to it. If I enjoy more traditional metal, it's typically in spite of like the metal styling. It's because I'm enjoying the rule of cool riffage, or maybe there's like a really cool vocal technique going on or something. Like it's a sonic thing that captures me, but not usually an emotive one. The song usually just sounds cool, or maybe I like the lyrics to it. Metal to me is very rarely a total package thing where every single thing works together. For me personally, where I can just enjoy everything in singularity and as the whole. This absolutely checks every box for me, while also simultaneously being one of the more extreme albums. Well, I guess I haven't heard the whole album yet. One of the more extreme sounds that I've really enjoyed, that I feel helps capture the vibe of the music, of the themes they're attempting to explore. Usually, I find the extremity in metal to be usually a bit over the top. There's a cheesiness, a campiness to extreme metal that you sort of have to accept when you're getting into it. And usually, at least for me, anyways, I don't know if any of you feel this way, but the more extreme it gets, the harder it is for me to take it seriously. There are certainly songs where the lyrics are totally serious, but the sounds to me aren't. It's probably why I end up laughing as often as I do with extreme metal. Y'all are like, dude, why are you laughing at this song? It's like, dude, this is campy. This is wildly B movie cheesy, like extremity pushed to its limits. But here is a case where the extremity works. I can't really imagine. Now, we haven't listened to the lyrics yet, but the emotions that are present in the song aren't undercut or diminished by the extreme sounds, the metallic guitars, the double bass kicks, the growling and screaming and like DSBM vocal style vocals in here as well. I mean, that whistle scream, I still think that's what it is, and I'll touch on that later with my hypothesis. If you don't know what a whistle tone scream is, like these things don't diminish the emotional capacity of it. They actually support it. This feels more powerful because of the extreme elements, but it's never pushed into the realm of like, I don't know, the most extreme, wild, the cryptopsy level of like extremity. It still is a bit restrained, but it does use the language of, technical death metal and black metal to achieve the overall atmosphere and emotion in this track. And there is also the fact that I would never classify this as anything other than metal. There are folk elements in here for sure. But at the heart of everything, of composition, of general sound and texture, there's so much screaming and growling and aggressive drums and aggressive guitar and bass work in here. It's just consistently, definitely metal. But it's progressive enough to use elements outside of that in order to, again, not just to simply exist because they sound cool, but to support and increase the emotional capacity that the song is able to represent. And I can feel my body cooling right now. But I'm not even lying. Halfway through that track, I could feel my body was warmer. It isn't just that, I began to, I could feel like little sweat drops appear. And like, I don't know, the back of my shoulders a little damp too. Like the song made me sweat. That doesn't happen very often. Maybe this is in the same area as like Goosebumps on the Arms, but like a more disgusting version of that. That song was so good, I started sweating. But it's true. Most music doesn't affect me that way. Something about that song really connected with me, though, and caused a physical reaction out of it. And I don't know, I just want to take this moment that even if the rest of the album ends up disappointing me in one way or another, as extreme metal typically is a bit tough for me to enjoy, these opening 11 minutes, basically this opening third of the album, was phenomenal, emotionally engaging, totally affecting, and I honestly have nothing but praise for what I've heard so far. This is phenomenally written, fantastically performed, and the vision of it is perfectly executed. I don't think, well, at this moment, I have nothing negative to say about this track. Maybe that'll change as I start talking and come around to new conclusions and stuff, but yeah, I mean, this is just, it's a beautifully melancholic, wonderfully written song. Now, as any good opening track should do, we have a mood setter. Sometimes that mood setter's job is to present what the album is going to do musically, where the first song is a full track, no shorter or longer than the average of all your other songs, and it just presents exactly what you're going to get on the rest of the album. Last week's Frontierer Oxidized did a fantastic job of that. The first track is a really good hurdle. If you can jump over it, you're probably set for the rest of the album. If you miss it, though, you should probably duck out because the rest of the album's not going to be any different than the first song. Now, another way, though, is to set the emotional tone and atmosphere for the album. And I think that this song does a phenomenal job of that. 1937 kicks off with some strings. And within the first 3 seconds, we have heard a series of note combinations. I'm going to call it a chord progression, even though usually we think of chords progressing a bit slower, taking up more space. This was a pretty rapid movement, and we immediately get hit with melancholy. From there, we have a choir come in, just sort of swell in a little bit, bringing more melancholic and sorrowful sounds to the soundscape. Some strings support that. Eventually, the choir leaves after they've just sung a few notes. They don't stick around for too long. And then we basically have this heavy, melancholic atmosphere from the few instruments left over droning on this emotional weight. We don't really get a lot of movement. It just sort of exists. And within that is layered placement of people crying. Sorrow is the key emotion here in the first 2 minutes. It's a wonderful way to use a combination of traditional composition styles, melodic movement, and atmosphere building, alongside just simple emotional responses to people in tears. When you hear people crying like this, you kind of get swept up into that too. It's mostly just, in a sense, field recordings. Maybe this was all recorded in a studio, but whatever, the idea is that we just have people sobbing in this song. And between the use of that and the more traditional musical elements giving us right from the start these melancholic cues, we're putting two and two together and kicking off the song pretty bleak. Not a great start if you're looking for a positive, joyful experience. Track 2, the song, continues on with this. The beginning of the track kicks off with, once again, strings. And, oh yeah, I know what that says. I was like, what are those? I can't read my handwriting most of the time, and it doesn't help that the marker I'm taking notes on is dying, and it's just not as clear. I need to buy a new marker. Anyways, strings, sorrowful ideas. But this sorrow actually has more than just melancholic cues in it. There's also pain, especially once we start bringing in some of the, what I believe are traditional Chinese instruments, bringing in some of those folk elements to it. These instruments really lean into a painful type of sorrow. We have, I don't remember how long, 30, 40, 60 seconds maybe of this acoustic instrumental intro to the track, really laying down this emotional key. Before the metal kicks in, dude just screams, we got guitar, we got big drum stuff. This to me is a feeling of utmost pain, a representation of the sorrow turned to anger. The multifaceted emotional scream, just a need to let out all of these emotions and whatever sound that might be. It was jarring, it was frightening, it was startling even. I wasn't expecting it. The music doesn't lean you into that, it doesn't build into it. You have this very somber soundscape 1 second, and the very next beat is screaming in metal and aggression. Emotions certainly do swirl into each other, but emotions can also take you by surprise. You thought you were happy one moment and something just wells up in you and you begin crying, sobbing uncontrollably. Where did that come from? You weren't expecting that. You're taken as much by surprise as the person next to you. I really feel like that's what this is. A sudden outburst, a necessary release of anger and sadness, sorrow, pain, grief. The rest of the song, I think, does a fantastic job of dancing around most of this negativity. I'm not going to go section by section, but I think if you're really paying attention to the song, you're going to be able to feel grief and pain and sorrow and anger in equal measurements, in complex combinations of them. One section might feel a bit more sorrowful, a heavy weight pushed down upon you, and then the one after that might feel more of a painful aggression, followed by grief. The song does a great job of mixing and matching these and creating these complex emotional atmospheres as it tries to explore the midpoint of all of these negative emotions. I think the metallic side, as extreme as it can be, does a great job of representing the extremity of these feelings. It isn't just sadness. It isn't just sorrow. It is depression. It is melancholy. It is grief. It is the extreme versions of these negative emotions. You need that sort of extremity to explore this, especially if lyrically any of these songs are going to be touching on the idea of what the album's namesake is, the Nanking Massacre. This was an incredibly heartbreaking moment in China's history. You really need extreme music to capture those extreme emotions. Now, beyond the emotional landscape, to kind of push into the more objective analytical side of things, I want to look at most of the instrumentation on this. Sure, we do have metal guitars, distorted, amplified. We have a few different harsh vocal techniques. We have the bass, but we also have a plethora of clean acoustic string instruments. And I don't know what all of these are. Like I said, to my ears, there is definitely an element of the timbre that reminds me of, in general, I'd say in an Asian style of string instrument, the specific techniques used to play them, the specific materials that go into the instruments, they sound different than traditional Western instruments. Maybe they are Chinese instruments, but I don't know what they are. Most of the time, especially with Western instruments, I can hear an instrument and I'd be like, oh, it's this one particularly. And I know the history of this instrument and where it comes from. And there's some Japanese instruments I know, but I wouldn't say that these sound like those. They're close, but they're not identical. So again, I don't know what instruments these are. I don't know where they come from. I don't even know if they're being used in the traditional way because I don't know what that way is. But what I do find interesting is the way that the timbres themselves play off of everything else in the song. What I find most interesting about it is that these instruments are being played in a way that tend to fit with the metal. Now, granted, some of these sections, it's just a drone or a simple melody played alongside, an aggressive metal riff. This would be no different than if you had violin or an acoustic guitar playing these parts. But there's also a black metal element to this song. 16th note picking, the higher pitched harsh vocals to me are very blackened, and 16th note bass kicks. In places of the song, we do have 16th note picking and bowing on these acoustic instruments. I'm curious if that is a traditional way to play them, or if these instruments are simply being played in a manner that matches the extremity of the metal that they're being played alongside. I don't know. And honestly, I think at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. It's just a little bit of curiosity for me. If you know what these instruments are, and maybe I should go look a personnel list up and see if I can identify the instruments myself before the end of this video. But I really like a mixture of past and present, of bringing traditional ideas into modern ideas. One of the things I love about symphonic metal is, yes, they do bring in brass and, primarily strings, but also, brass and woodwinds and auxiliary percussion, your glockenspiels and timpanis and stuff sometimes show up. And I love when these instruments are used in their traditional classical sounds. When you use the woodwind section like a classical composer would, or when the violins are doing something other than basically what your guitars are playing, when they're actually doing something that violins would do that the guitars wouldn't. And I love this clashing of worlds, having a knowledge of the traditional use of your instrument and using those traditional ideas within your modern music. Like I said, it doesn't really change what the song is doing. It doesn't, if they weren't more traditional uses, I don't think it would alter the way I feel about this song. It is still, in my books, minus having looked at the lyrics so far, a masterpiece. But I think this would elevate it a little bit if I knew that they were using traditional sounds and techniques in the song. Because it isn't just, hey, I like the sound of this instrument, let me write for it. It's, hey, I like the sound of the instrument and I know how to use it. That little bit of extra knowledge being put in. That always interests me as both a composer and a musician. Everything just works in here. And it works because of the composition. Like, it doesn't even matter what these instruments are. When we listen at the end of the song and we hear the two string instruments on the sides of the song and the two guitars a little closer, the bass in the center and the drums, and you listen to all the complex writing, we have 7 instruments here, 6 instruments here, plus the vocals, and they're all doing different things. Sometimes they might line up on rhythmic devices, but the 4 lead instruments, the 2 strings and the 2 guitars, they all have different parts. There's complexity of layering and interlocking ideas in here. It is a complex clock. All these cogs and gears working in tune with each other. Slightly different sizes, slightly different ideas, but if any one of them are missing, the song would fall apart. It isn't just, hey, I wrote one riff and gave it to every instrument on the song. I mean, it is dense. There's a lot of ideas going on. And by the end of the song, not only do we have all of these unique layers, but we also have 3 vocal parts going on. 2 off to the side, 1 center, and yes, I think 2 of them are harmonizing as far as you can harmonize harsh vocals, but I'm pretty sure the 3rd one was doing its own thing too, just another piece to this complex puzzle. It is fascinating to listen to all of this on a sheer technical level. The fact that they can bring all of this technicality together while still not losing the emotional side is what I think makes this song so effective. It is overwhelming. Do not confuse my words for that at all. While I have expressed a lot of praise and positivity for this, I do find this to still be an overwhelming sound. Just because I enjoy the composition of it all doesn't mean that the heightened performance and explosive, massive sounds and aggressive vocals do not wear me down like they usually do. It is still a draining listen, but it is such a good style of draining. And maybe this is what people get out of other more traditional extreme metal sounds. It is draining, but it is a good kind of draining for them. I don't usually get that. It's more of, this sounds like a lot of things, a lot of stuff going on, and I'm just becoming fatigued by it. This, like I mentioned before, I have emotional engagement with. And that's something I just don't find too often in the realm of technical metal, whether that is prog metal or tech death or, whatever, symphonic metal. I guess symphonic metal might be a little bit of the outlier there. Because they aren't always extreme, and they tend to go in a more emotional direction too. But I find that the more technical a band gets, the less emotionally engaged they become. They kind of lose that emotional side for, as I've heard it said before, the wankery of the musical stuff. And this side has everything. It's the full package. The composition is exceptionally solid, but the emotion is still there. In fact, the emotion is embellished because of the complexity and technicality going on the more analytical side of things. It really is both sides of the brain smashed together and amplifying both each other's side through that combination, and then directing that into our brains through our ears across the medium of sound waves. Just absolutely phenomenal. It really isn't one thing. The emotional side is amazing. The composition and musicianship is fantastic, and it's because these two come together that really elevates it. And that's probably why I enjoy it. It doesn't feel lopsided to me. As extreme as this song can be in places, as overwhelming and complexly layered, it's balanced. That is a rarity in metal, at least the metal I've been introduced to. Maybe there's an entire realm that might balance my experience with metal, but for the most part, metal tends to favor specific elements. and creates a bit more of a lopsided listening experience for me in particular. These two I kind of want to work together. It's vocals and production, and it's primarily because I don't think I have a lot to say about either, but I do want to bring up praise for both of these. There are at times 3, maybe 4 different vocal lists, singing vocal styles going on. There is a higher pitched, like black metal, sort of nasally scream. There's also what I think is a false chord lower pitched one. And then there's also a false chord growl. So 2 fries and a false chord is what I hear. Sometimes we double up on one of those. And I think at the end, when I mentioned that there might be a 4th vocal in that final section, I think it's where we double up on one of the techniques. But spacing them out in the mix is what allows it to be heard. Just having 3 styles in and of itself, I find the diversity of the sound and the contrast of them to be a positive. Just having one style of sound all the time can be a bit boring for me, but jumping between them certainly helps. But beyond that, we also have the layering. We have sections with just 2 of those, and that's going to give us 3 combinations right there. We have sections with all 3 styles. We have sections with all 3 styles, but one of them is doing a totally different vocal line. The possibilities are quite vast on what you can do once you start opening yourself up to having different vocal styles, harmonizing your different vocal styles, and working with vocal counterpoint, where you'll have 2 different sets of lyrics with 2 different sets of rhythms on 2 different styles of vocals going concurrently. I loved this from start to finish. There's also the other technique that I have to bring up, and whistle tone screaming. Now, I'm not a vocal coach. This is going to be probably not even like vocal 101 level. If you want to know more about this, somebody's got to be on the internet, on YouTube. There's got to be something that goes a bit more in depth of what whistle tone singing and maybe even screaming is about. But from what I understand, and I could totally be wrong, please correct me if I'm wrong. Do not take what I'm saying as gospel. Definitely, if you're interested, go find someone else with better information. But there's a way to get way above your natural range. And I don't know if it's called whistle tone because the range tends to be in that whistle range, or if it's because you're actually using the technique of whistling, which is like air passing through specific shapes. And I don't know how whistling works, man. I can just do it, right? But I've heard vocalists, particularly in the operatic range, in operas in general, pushing into this range of their music. And it's just really high pitched. And the thing about it, to me at least, is there is a lot of freaking clarity to it. Sort of like how a whistle, you can kind of get like a faint whistle and some airiness to it, but like when you hit the whistle, it's just a clear sound. It is like, to me, it always feels very physical. And I think that's why whistles can be very loud. But it's like you're directing a tube of sound out of your mouth, just this really condensed sound wave. And you gotta get that with whistle tone singing too. It is just clear, sharp, present, physical, and loud. And I've always wondered, could you make that tone and put compression on it somehow? And I have a hypothesis that this is how Maria Brink does some of her really high-pitched vocals from the band in this moment. I really haven't heard anyone else do this, though. Maybe general DSBM vocalists, but also in that area, there tends to be a lot of mythologization, the creating of myth around musicians who harmed themselves in the process of their music making. So maybe it's less whistle tone and more just really pushing their body to their limits. But again, I think the only vocalist would be from Silencer? Was that the name of the band or was that the name of the song? I don't remember, but that song has stood in my mind for a very long time. Not always for good reasons, but the vocalist certainly has a really high pitch to it, a high pitched harsh to it. But I think this is the only other time outside of DSBM that I've heard what I perceive to be a whistle tone harsh. And I'm curious if this is a real thing or if this person can just really get a high pitch harsh out of their fry screaming. I don't know. Again, I'm not a vocal coach, but there's something unique to this, to these really high pitched. He only did it twice, but these really high pitched harshes that I've never heard before. Well, other than in this moment, it's a big rarity, and I'm curious if anyone, vocal coach, has more insight to this, someone who would actually be knowledgeable about the topic. The other thing I wanted to bring up here is just production. Totally solid. You already know where I'm going with this. Every instrument is clear and present in the mix. Nothing really gets covered up or is muddy. Even in that final section with 2 or 3 folk instruments, the full metal band, 3 or 4 vocalists, you can still clearly hear everything, even the bass, which is really being drowned out with all of these layers on top of its low-end foundational stuff. You can still make out what it's doing. The engineer definitely deserves a massive raise for this because it would not be easy to balance out everything that's going on here, and yet it sounds so effortless. So, big props to that. Let me hit some lyrics on this. Maybe I will look up person. I was gonna say, because normally I wait until like halfway into the album to start looking up details so I don't spoil myself, but there's only 3 songs on this album. We're technically coming up to the halfway point already. If I wait until the next song, there's only 1 left after that. Although I think we are going to do track 5 by itself. It is 5.5 minutes and doesn't have an interlude around it like the others do. So I guess technically there's 4 tracks. 2, 4, 5, and 6. And then 1, 3, and 7 are shorter interlude ones. Still though, we don't have a lot of music left. I might as well start looking things up. So yeah, let's get into that. All right, so there are 3 traditional Chinese instruments on this album. I think we heard all 3 of them on this track. I knew 2 of them. I had seen them used in film, maybe. I recognize what they look like, but I don't think I ever knew their names. And the third one, I've never even seen before. So this was pretty educational for me. As usual, I kind of want to pass this education on to you as well. So we have some pictures here. We're going to look at this. The first one is the Husheng, and it's this plucked string instrument. And let me just be clear, my pronunciations are going to be pretty bad. I did listen to pronunciations of these 3 instruments. I am doing my best, but I know I'm going to sound like an American dude trying to say this stuff. But this creates a very nice plucked sound. It reminds me a lot like a dulcimer almost. So we do have this. We also have another instrument called the erhu, which is kind of like, if we were to relate it to a Western instrument, a small cello. This little black piece right here, you would rest on your leg. It sits upright and you bow across it while, holding different lengths of the string to create different pitches. So this would be more of the bowed sound that I was talking about on this track. And the last one is called the xin, and it is a type of vessel flute. If you've ever seen an ocarina, it's kind of close to that. It's another type of vessel flute. But I'm going to assume you blow air into the top. You have the holes here that you're going to cover for different notes, and the sound comes out elsewhere to produce different pitches. And that's going to be more of the aerophone, which is a classification of instruments that deal with air pushing air. Woodwinds, brass, these instruments tend to get put in here. Trumpets, flutes, clarinets. Aerophone is more of the general terminology for it that encompasses more instruments than just the Western world. Because, normally we would call those woodwinds and brass. So yeah, we have plucked string, bowed string, and air-based instrumentation here. So that is very cool, and I'm going to try my best to remember the names of these instruments, but at the very least, I've now seen a new one, and I can listen to more of the timbres as we explore the rest of this album and try to at least make a memory of the sound of these instruments so I can call it back later. Might not know the exact name, but I'll be like, oh yeah, it's, one of those Chinese instruments. All right. Lyrics, then. This is less fun of a topic. These are much darker, as expected. It seems to be with somebody attempting to reconcile or feel the emotions of the past, or reconcile with things that happened in the past. He says at the very beginning, in the dream, it seems like yesterday. Now, I think this is more of a general yesterday, as in the past, more so than deliberately 24 hours ago. But he says that this body that I'm in is like me, but not. The cold fog cuts my skin and chills my bone, and my mind is sinking into the deep sea. There's no form, no color in all directions. Who will lead the way? I'm panicked and worried, and I've lost my soul, love, death, life, hate, resentment, desire. They all go away. He begins to talk about ghosts that haunt this place. He says, who has even ever seen the true Dharma, saving all sentient beings from suffering and escape from difficulties with compassion? So basically, he says, who's ever actually seen a positivity of afterlife? Who's ever been pulled away from the suffering of mortal living? He says, all I see are ghosts. They become disasters like their teeth are like spears. The world is upside down. It's unkind, but don't sigh about this. Almost as if to say this is just the way things are. If you sigh, it's like, geez, things could have been better, but could they have been? No. It says the disaster of war, families wiped out. I'm now left alone, choking on sorrow. An old man sheds tears. The young break into crying. There's no way to deal with the enemy, rampant and wanton killing and plundering. Tears flow in vain. He says, though, that things do grow out of this. The stones remain the same. The bones build the hills. The river water rolls. How many wrong souls were drowned there? Dust and smoke wiping out traces of people. White silk is dirty, yellow papers, messy, rats running around coffins. There's corpses everywhere. Yeah, assuming that every song in here is going to be somehow related to the Nanking Massacre, this, I think, is a pretty accurate depiction of the massacre as it was happening. Finding a way to put your mind into someone from the past and describing what you see both emotionally and literally. I think the music does a fantastic job of capturing these visual landscapes into a sonic one. There doesn't seem to be any sort of positivity out of this. No light at the end of the tunnel, just a depiction of something terrible. I kind of figured that's the way it was going to go given the music, but it's still something else to read it. And this is translated by Google Translate. I couldn't find a hand translated version of it. Although I need to double check something. We might have hand translated in the future. Sometimes people send me hand translated ones, and I have to double check if that happened for this one. But I mean, even with some of the roughness of the translation, maybe some elements don't hit as hard or don't quite translate well, it still accurately depicts what I think the song is attempting to convey. There is one extra detail. I won't have hand translated lyrics for the rest of the album, but I was directed to a music video for this song that has hand translated lyrics in it. And it recontextualized the final stanza. I didn't actually talk about it because I wasn't entirely sure what it was aiming to say. It did seem to go along with more of the negativity and depictions of death, but I didn't understand the purpose of it. I just figured it was more of what we already explored, but it isn't. He says, as I look around at all of this in, with these dying eyes, still being in that body years ago, he says that I will gather and assemble the spirits and make a vibrant light out of them, turning their bones into swords. Even in the afterlife, my motherland, I will always die for you. And it talks about a a renewed national spirit because of these atrocities, and building not like literal weaponry, but passion, fervor out of these events to strengthen both him and, I assume, the nation for resolution from this. I did notice a little bit of uplift in the final minute and a half or so of the song, and I couldn't quite figure out what that was, and having the lyrics not lean into that at all, I sort of just dismissed it. It was a cool part of the song, but I didn't understand the purpose of it. But there is not necessarily a positivity in this final stanza, but certainly a light at the end of the tunnel, something I said was missing previously. It is here. It just wasn't quite present in the rough translation that I was originally using on this. And that makes me a little upset, knowing that I got a little bit of extra context in this track with hand translated lyrics, and I'm not going to have that for the two other songs that have lyrics on this album. So that's not great, but we will continue forward, I suppose. What else can we do? Once again, a 1 minute track, but this time a 7-minute follow-up. We're only going to look at a 9-minute collection of tracks rather than 11. We have Evocation and The Karma. Very atmospheric. Those massive, heavy drums against the long bends. It feels destructive. Almost sounded like lightning with whatever that background sound was on the right. Is that throat singing too? The harmonic structure here is way less balanced than the first one. There's a lot of dissonant intonation on this one. Was that the vocalist? There's no way. Dude, that just, wow. I figured we were going to have 7 minutes of metal. You know, straightforward death metal with some... Because we did have the traditional instruments kind of placed throughout. Well, we're going for something more atmospheric here in the middle of this track. That's kind of a fun riff right there. Okay, this is going in a fun direction. I will classify fun later. Lots of dissonance on this too. Now, I didn't read anything about traditional drums. This is not a drum kit, though. I like how I'm not able to predict where things are going. While our two interlude style tracks have both been atmospheric, they've both been very differently handled. And while our two full metal tracks, well, I guess our two full tracks have been mostly metal, they also are two very different ideas. This was nothing like the song. So much so that I don't know I don't think I'm a big fan of this one. I think it has some cool moments in it, but generally speaking, the song set such a high bar, and I was expecting more of that, and we didn't quite get it. So I feel a little let down on this, but that's my own fault for setting those expectations. But I'm going to return to the first two tracks on this sometime, someday. Like, they are set in my mind. Black Kirin has a very big bookmark in my mind for this type of metal, and I'm sure I'm going to reference the song sometime in the future when I'm reminded of or want to make a comparison to another band who does this mix of folk and metal and just really strong melodic writing really well. But the Karma, this track we just checked out, I'm probably good having just heard it this once. Not that it was bad, it's just, earlier I was talking about metal bands not balancing things very well, and this song is one that just kind of goes hard into that metal extremity and doesn't rein it in, doesn't balance it out with anything else. It's missing the other half that I think was in the song. So this is a solid track though, and they get your attention right from beat one. But in order to understand that, you really need to get what Evocation's going for. We have a massively atmospheric track, lots of bent guitar notes creating these semi-drony sounds going on in the backgrounds. They're paired with, I don't know what the other sound effects are, and often buttressed against these very large, massive chord strums on very distorted, gnarly, compressed guitars. It feels aggressive. It feels angry, but I think more importantly, it feels powerful. And this is all placed against sounds that create a very open sound sphere. I think I'd mentioned the term, I did write it down, so I did mention it, destruction. This feels like a desolate area. Something that might have been a place of life at one time, but is now a depiction of death. I don't know that I get emotion out of it. I think you can easily ascribe emotion to it, but mostly what I get through this song is uncaring destruction. So to move from this very open sound, very few instruments going, playing at any time, lots of drone, long held out sounds. We do get a little bit of an introduction to the throat singing there, I think at the end, which does reprise in track 4. But it tapers out. And then from that silence is instant metal. From beat 1, aggressive guitars, loud bass, wild drumming, screaming, all of that immediately. It is a jarring transition. I am really curious what the lyrics for the Karma are going to be about, but I think I'm equally curious what the intention is behind Evocation. Maybe the desolate landscape is what they're going for. But maybe there's something else. Why is the jarring transition what they were aiming to do? What is it supposed to represent in their mind? Because the jarring transitions are consistent on this track. Not only do we start in this instant metal out of nothing, but as we go through the track, we transition between metallic section to atmospheric section to metallic section to atmospheric section. In a lot of ways, this is very disjointed. Combining tracks 3 and 4 together, there just isn't a lot of cohesion from moment to moment. I have a tough time trying to figure out what this song is trying to say beyond the aggression in the metal and the disjointedness of the sections. I kind of hope the lyrics are going to help push me in a direction, but aside from that, I had less of an emotional connection to this one and less of a musical understanding of it as well. It is a song that has some interesting moments, but on the whole kind of let me down in a lot of ways, as I mentioned earlier on, and my lack of connecting with it mentally or emotionally is kind of why it doesn't hit me as hard. I think the album starts off really strong, and now I'm just kind of questioning what we're doing here. You lured me in with a really hard sell, and now I'm kind of, the deal isn't there. And I don't know why I'm here anymore. And that's kind of where I am with the Karma. It is a hyper aggressive song with some really strong death metal guitar, drum, and vocal work. We do still have the traditional instruments in here. They sit on the outsides of the song as they did with track 2, and they tend to embellish on what's going on with the metal side, but they're not always there. I'd say about half of the metal sections are just the metal bands, just doing pretty straightforward death metal stuff. Everything that I loved and praised about track 2 is, well, it's, I guess, an afterthought on this one. It's an element of this track, but not the element of this track. All of the exceptional writing and interconnected layers are gone. I really hope that this is for a thematic purpose. Maybe when I read the lyrics, a lack of unity might shine through. That helps put some of these choices into focus, but on a purely sonic level, like I said, I don't know why I'm here given how much I enjoyed the opening of the album. But it could very well have artistic merit to it. The riffs are good though. If you like death metal, you're probably going to enjoy this. The drumming is ferocious, intense, it keeps the energy moving, it is dynamic enough, constantly changing the patterns, and very expressive as it moves between halftime grooves and 16th note bass kicks and just jumping around between all these ideas. The vocals, the lack of dynamics in the vocals in most of this, I found to be the part that really turned me off the most, although there are those really wild swells starting from a lower tone, a lower harsh tone, and sweeping into that whistle tone harsh. Again, I don't know if that's really what's going on, but that's how I'm going to describe it today. Those were really impressive. I wish we could have seen more of that flexibility and dexterity in the parts where the vocals were laying down words rather than sounds. I wish we would have seen more of the layers that we had seen from track 2. Just anything to bring some more interest to what the vocals are doing. Now, I will say, the second metal part of this song was very fun. And I even said the word fun. And I think that's a weird word to put in something as heavy and abrasive and extreme and emotionally powerful as this album has been so far. But dude, those really short, I mean, they feel like staccato notes. Staccato notes are super short. Dut, 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 dut. Basically ending it as soon as you can right after the attack. But we were actually getting groups of them. It still kind of feels like just one very short note, but there's groups of 3 and 4 in these. They're bursts of even shorter notes than it feels like. And to create rhythms out of these varying groups, some 3, some 4, and creating a syncopated groove out of these collections of short notes that feel like short notes is very infectious. The entire feeling and groove and riffage in that second metal section was very cool with the drums lining up alongside this. It's just a very fun staccato riff, and alongside this we did get some clean vocals, and I thought this was excellent because the harsh vocals had kind of let me down a little bit on this track, and I was just expecting more of that. And instead we get some cleans to wrap this song up, or at least to push into the outro. And that was absolutely phenomenal. I love the cleans in here. There's a lot of passion and energy and emotion in them. And I think they play really well against the extremities of the metal. I really hope with 2 tracks left, a 5-minute and a 12-minute, that we can return to a mix of both of these. The more progressive and layered writing of the song with these great metal riffs and clean vocals we're seeing in the Karma. And finding a midpoint between all of this to really bring things together in a thematically appropriate way. We do need to hit a peak somewhere. I am expecting something exceptionally heavy moving into the last 10-15% of this album, wherever that lies. But I do want to return back to some of that more nuanced writing. And we saw a little bit of it here. Now, the other thing, though, beyond the metal, is that we have two atmospheric sections on this track. I don't know what to make of these. I think I've done a pretty good job with tracks 1 and 3 and sort of explaining how I think the emotional resonance of the instruments paired with some of the more sound effect elements, just adding non-musical components to them, how they tell a story and what I think they're supposed to be describing. But the two sections in here, lacking words, lacking metal instruments, just being this clean acoustic stuff, they just kind of were. Maybe it was me. Maybe it's a total skill issue here, and they are saying something and lost in translation to me. I'm just in the wrong dialect or something, but I didn't get anything out of them. And trying to understand why they're present juxtaposed to the metallic sections that sit beside them in this track didn't lead me to any answers either. I think that they were beautifully written sections, but they didn't tell me a story. They didn't explain to me an emotion. Well, again, let me reword that. I didn't understand a story or an emotion or some sort of atmosphere out of them, other than simply the fact that I enjoyed listening to them. I still think that they're masters at kind of doing both sides of this music, the more melodic riff based focused music, and then the atmospheric side of things, and even combining them both. The song has some sections with phenomenal heavy atmosphere and excellent integrated melodic parts within that. And I enjoyed listening to these moments. I don't know what they're saying. Again, though, maybe the lyrics will help point me in a direction. The music, as I mentioned, was rather disjointed, and that made it difficult to figure out the relationship between all of these ideas. So this was an interesting midpoint to the album. Having finished 2 of the 4 tracks now, not what I was expecting. Like I said earlier, I kind of hope that the rest of the album goes in a direction that I do enjoy, because I do want to point to this album as something that, in the realm of extreme metals, that I hold up pretty highly, that I enjoy for a lot of reasons. Let's hit some lyrics. I'm not entirely sure why this is called the karma. It does generally talk about, though, how everything has slipped down just a little bit in quality. Everything that was here is down. If it was here, now it's here. Talks about the land being in ruins, no longer mountains and rivers of the past. They are now the destruction of the present, that there's no food in the wild. It says dogs are like wolves, people, ghosts, thieves, bees, and soldiers are now bandits. It says we are all of the same root. Why do we fight each other? It's because we're timid and powerless to fight our enemies. We've ended up turning on each other for survival rather than working together to overthrow those who put us in this position. It says that we now trade children for food, and there's only ghosts left in the 10,000 households. Death from hunger, cold, disease. The reeds are used as coffins. Basically saying that there's nowhere to store the dead. They just put them wherever they can, whatever fields or rivers will hold the bodies. Saying desolate mountains have become cemeteries. Says that the country is now destroyed. Where is our general? This is the first track, which I guess 2 out of 3 with lyrics is kind of tough to say it's the first one that does this, but this has repeated phrases in it. As far as I can tell, track 1 was completely linear with the lyrics. This one isn't, though. We return to the idea that there are only ghosts left in the households. describing why all these people have passed away, it then says that the demon army entered the city and slaughtered the people. This phrase is repeated 4 times within this final 2 stanzas. Also, the terms 100,000 evil soldiers lurked in the city and destroyed our ancient capital, razed it to the ground. That's repeated a couple of times as well. It just talks about how everything is worse. There's more destruction, more death, less resources, and generally people turning on each other. Again, I'm curious why it's called karma. Does the narrator believe the Chinese people needed to be put in this position because of some wrongdoings that they had recently done? That's typically what karma is. When you do good things, you benefit. When you do bad things will come and happen to you. Although that might be a bit reductive, and if someone has a better understanding of actual karma, because I know that's a bit more of a Western pop culture view on karma, it's quite a bit deeper than that. I don't have that sort of information. But if you understand the concept of karma a little bit better, maybe you can explain how it relates to this song. But I don't see much of a relationship here. And maybe, thinking back to those instrumental bits, maybe this sort of having a desolate, no future ahead of us, no way to grow out of this feeling, is what those sections are supposed to be about. Just a numb acceptance of the way things are and no hope for the future. It's quite possible. I'd have to go back and listen to those moments again because it has been almost 25 minutes since we listened to the song. Some of the details are beginning to escape me. It's quite possible though that those moments, that's what they were representing. I vaguely remember emotional details like that I kind of glossed over as they were a bit less apparent and less exaggerated than the feelings of sorrow and despair that we heard in the opening 11 minutes. But just because the emotions are a bit more muted doesn't mean that they're not there at all, and I might have just missed them because of that. All right, we're going to look at our shortest group of songs here because it's a group of one. Is that really a group? But it's only 5 minutes long, called Bootless Cries. After this, we will run into our final 12 minutes of music. So we have the Hucheng here as our primary instrument, though we do have some sort of drone going on in the background as well. I think the atmosphere is actually reverberates from the instrument, no? So sometimes. Right now it's pretty dry. And that's not coming from the instrument. Okay, so probably not. Just a coincidence that one time. Rare moments of beauty. Wonderful dynamics too. The control of flow, speed, volume. It's a very haunting sound. It's a word that I'm kind of surprised it took so long for me to use to describe the music, not because it's been there and I've been ignoring it, but for a song about this event, haunting is something I kind of imagined would have showed up earlier. Such control there at the end. For a song called Bootless Cries, I assumed it was going to be a little bit more somber. I mean, we've had some really sad tracks on this album. I figured we were going to go back in that direction, but it was actually more optimistic than I expected, which is very cool. It had a nice dance between hope and optimism and feeling of despair and sorrow. It also introduced those more haunting moments as well, completely produced by the background sounds, the drone that goes on. I don't know what, I don't think it's an instrument. I think that's just sound effects that they're using, but it definitely creates something that feels stretched. I don't know if any of y'all have ever played with, I guess like sound stretching tools. I think of the classic Paul stretch, which I used a little bit way back in the day. And the idea of taking a sound maybe just a 3 second sound and stretching it out to 30 seconds, you really spend a lot of time with the textures of this sound. You kind of turn it into its own soundscape rather than maybe just a specific note or a group of a few notes. And the very hazy, gradual shifting between very textured notes in the background of this song reminds me of my time playing around with Paul stretch, of stretching out these sounds and melodies and stuff. That can sort of be viewed in two ways. It does create this very haunting feel, and I think that is a core component of it. But are we stretching out time to where this one moment feels like an eternity, or are we allowing ourselves to view an eternity of pain through the lens of 5.5 minutes, condensing all of that down? It's not really clear to me either way, and maybe interpreting it simultaneously both ways is the right way to go about this. Regardless, we do have a song that moves between more sorrowful ideas with these haunting sounds into more optimistic ideas without them, focusing entirely on the solo instrument. I think it's important then that after moving into this more positive, hopeful sound, we push back into the haunting melancholy and end it with a melancholic optimism. We end the song on a more positive note, even if it isn't truly positive. It is a mix of the two, which isn't something we've really had too much on the album. Any complex emotional landscapes we've heard have been a complexity of negative emotions. I'm curious then what this song is supposed to represent to the artist. What is the authorial intent on this? I'm kind of hoping that maybe the lyrics of track 6 will inform us a little bit of that. I do enjoy the optimism in here, but if the next track just pushes back into the despair and anger and sorrow that we've heard in the other two sets of lyrics, I'm not quite sure what its purpose is in this track. So I do hope that this is a moment of uplift, a directional change for the album to begin exploring something else, something a little more positive, a true light at the end of the tunnel that track 2 sort of alluded to. Now, outside of an emotional read on this, I do want to just look at the sheer technical aspect of the performance. We do have a Huchung solo right here. This instrument sounds gorgeous. Like I said, it's a plucked string instrument. We saw a picture of it earlier. We do have those sections that I really love. Each of the strings, if I remember this correctly, you don't change the pitch of them. It's not like a guitar or a cello or anything like that, where you can strum it on one note and then change the pitch by changing the length of the note. That's actually how stringed instruments work like this. Is that the string is tuned to a specific note based on tension of the string of length. And when you cut the string length in half, you're actually going to get an octave higher because you're doubling the rate at which it vibrates, which doubles the pitch. And this is a bit like 101. There's a bit more science to it, and maybe on a technical level, I'm wrong there, but I think for a general audience, it's close enough to being accurate of a description of how it works. But here you don't actually change the pitch of the strings at all. There is a pitch for every note, and that's why there's so many strings that are consistently getting smaller. And so we have these sections where just continuously picking a string to create this constant attack on that note. I find this to be interesting because it primarily shows up in the more optimistic section. It isn't supposed to be an oppressive weight, I don't think. It's supposed to be empowering, to find the strength and energy here, to have the repeated attacks give you the energy to push forward, not a weight to push you down. But the performance itself, which is what I was going on about here, is it's very dynamic, and I love that about it. It feels like the ocean. It comes in waves and levels back out and rises again. There's sections with multiple parts going on, and others where it's just one note at a time, just the melody. There's rising volumes, there's relaxing volumes, there's more sorrowful movements in here that kind of bring the mood down a little bit, and then these optimistic flourishes, even empowering at some parts with those I don't even know what you would call them, the quick runs up in pitch. It sounded to me as if just taking, I don't know if they're finger picked or if they have some sort of picking device for them, but just running straight up, sort of like running your finger along, all the white keys on a piano. Just kind of catching every note with this glissando. Is that what it's called? I gotta look that up. It sounds right to me, but there's a part of me that's like, no, I think that's a different technique. But anyways, I'll look that up when we don't do a dip for lyric. I'm gonna pause anyways and look it up, and give a correction on that, just so that this doesn't sit here as misinformation for too long. If it is misinformation, if I am wrong on it. But they're very optimistic rises in pitch, really quick, rapid rises. And we had sections where we would go up a few notes and then drop down halfway and then come up again, drop down halfway, and just this constant rising energy like a phoenix out of the ashes. It's very inspiring in these moments, and I think that makes the return back to the haunting section even more heartbreaking. It felt like we were crawling out of this only to find ourselves back in the same position. The ending could just be read as a cycle, I suppose, then, but I like ending the song on a semi-positive movement. They're not going to stop here. They're not going to let this be the end of their story. There is a brighter tomorrow. We just got to get there. Let me look up that technique real quick, and then we'll dive into our final bit of music. All right, so second time today, I'm getting a bit of an education. A glissando is the technique of moving across all the white keys on a piano, or just rising up in pitch in general, but that's only more of a colloquial definition and is technically described as an effective glissando. But a true glissando is a musical term that refers to a continuous sliding from one pitch to another. So you would need to be able to smoothly move between the notes. Vocalists, trombones, fretless instruments, fretless stringed instruments, probably with a bow, because you would need the continuous tone of it. Although I suppose you could slide really quickly on like a guitar, a bass guitar, if you strum and then as far as you can get on it before having to strum again. That would be a true glissando. But what we heard here was an effective glissando. So I didn't know about the trueness. Has to be continuous sliding. Very cool stuff, but I had the term right. And I might have actually learned about the true glissando back in university, and maybe that's why my gut was like, dude, I don't know if you're 100% on that, because I knew somewhere in my mind that I wasn't 100% right. I don't ever remember hearing the words true and effective around it. Anyways, enough about me. We are here for Black Kirin. Let's dive into our final group of music here. Track 6's Wangchuan River, track 7's Millennium. Let's dive in. All right, this is solid. Definitely has a watery feel for a song called River. That's a good start to this. A bell? Ooh, lots of bells. Like chimes? I wonder if this is a guest vocalist. I believe we heard these feminine vocals on track 3 as well. I can't remember. We have heard them a little bit in the past, but when I was looking stuff up, I'm pretty sure it is a band of all male musicians. And I didn't read anything about a guest vocalist. So we're back to the interlocking parts, but I also love how this is more folk-oriented. We don't have any distorted instruments yet, but we still have the harsh vocals. Bringing the melodic layers over the metallic atmosphere. Yeah, this is good. And a Sheen solo. This is the vessel flute instrument. Lots of movement in the drum pattern as well. Pay attention to all of the sounds across the X-axis. A little bit of some heavy metal solo writing influence in there. Oh, even this duet too. The one guitar wailing as if in pain, and the other just constant intensity. Dude, I'm melting. It's so good. It's almost an element of peace in this melody over here. And it's been passed over to this instrument? The melody just keeps bouncing between instruments. This bowed instrument over here is the arfu, the one that's upright. Crisp production on the guitar bass drum combo. We're gonna end this like we started, presumably. Very calming. You know, I mentioned elements of peace in the song proper, but both of these intros, very calming. Or the intros, the bookends. There's those big drums again. I'm still curious what these are. I mean, they could just be orchestral bass drums and maybe timpanis of some sort. The timbre is a little off on the drum over here for timpani, but kind of close. Given that we have a return of the water and acoustic instrumentation, you figured these two songs would have run together. I was told to listen to them together, and I kind of assumed they would. I wonder if this is a situation of Spotify tampering, putting breaks between tracks that shouldn't have them, or if this is how it sounds on the CD. It's interesting that we're getting that really hazy texture in the background, sort of like in the lower energy sections of track 4, The Karma, but these aren't haunting. Absolutely gorgeous. Oh, the birds, too. This is a song of growth. It's called Millennium. Dude, this album is so good. The Karma is still, it's a solid track, but compared to tracks 2 and 6, it's certainly, I think, the weakest song on the album. Their instrumental writing is evocative. The atmospheres are fantastic. I love the melody writing too across this entire album, whether it is the more metallic guitar riffs on it, or if it is the lead melody writing that we get from clean vocals, whether it is the, I'm going to assume, lyricless clean vocals like we had in those final moments, or if it is the main band vocalist doing the clean vocals like we saw in the Karma, or if it's on one of these traditional instruments. The melody writing is just great consistently, whether it's interlocked or if it's just by itself against a background. I mean, I just, every time there's a melodic component, I am sold on that moment. They do a fantastic job of being hyper aggressive in that realm of extreme metal, but they also do a wonderful time with the more delicate sounds that they want to create. And they're amazing at atmosphere writing too, and their lyrics are evocative. It really is a band that hits on every single level. I don't really have a lot to say about either of these tracks that I haven't said about anything else in here. Track 6 kicks off with an intro, very soothing and calming. We're actually going to end on this same idea. Beautiful vocal melodies against the sound of water, whether someone's wading through the water or it's just moving on its own, whatever, there's just the sound of water moving against it. And some of the traditional instrumentation there as well. Just beautiful, peaceful moments. I love the addition too of the birds. I don't think they were at the beginning of track 6, but we heard them at the end of track 6. A return back to this peaceful sound, but evolved, grown over the course of the track. To me, this is about a restoration of the status quo, a restoration of nature. You may remember that track 4, The Karma, had mentioned that there's no food in the wild, that the land is no longer the same land it was of the past. Here, though, we have wildlife returning to the area. Whether the wildlife was actually gone or if it was simply symbolic, it doesn't matter. Nature being somewhere, including bird songs, the growth of flora. This is and has always been metaphorically a showcase of healing. I think it's excellent that they use that here as well to give us something we've heard before, but show how it's changed, how it's become better and removed the wound that was once there. Now, I say all this without knowing what the lyrics are that happen between the intro and the outro, but that's how I interpret that. And the track Millennium that comes after it continues this trend. Beauty, peace, calm, water, birds. Millennium is, of course, 1,000 years. These events happened as the title track states, not the title track, the first track, 1937. A millennium would be 2937. I don't know what necessarily they are implying here, other than the fact that 1,000 years from this event, the land there will have been restored. Peace will have been brought back. There's also a lack of anger here. I wonder if maybe not necessarily forgiveness, but moving on and understanding that hatred would breed revenge and vengeance, and that would create a cycle of violence, not necessarily of backing down, but just of knowing the proper path forward, how to bring positivity and joy back to your country, back to your people. That 1,000 years from now, this will still be our history, but we will have persevered through it and have found peace and calm in the future due to the actions of those who came before us. I think that's what they're going for. But again, the lyrics to track 6 may change my interpretation of that. I'll be digging into that real soon. But I love generally all of the vibes here in the final 12 minutes, minus the more metallic sections, which are still very cool. We'll get into that in a second, but the intro and outro of track 6 and the entirety of track 7 are wonderful and a fantastic area to move into, given all of the pain of the rest of this album. It does take the optimism that we saw in track 4 and track 5 and runs with it. I find that to be beautiful. There is the metal part though. And I found the beginning of track 6's metal section to also be beautiful. It carries a lot of the acoustic instrumentation from the intro into the metal section. We do bring in the guitars, the drums, the bass, the growling. Wait, no, we don't bring in all of that. Let me correct this. There's a section, I forgot about this, non-metallic. We have all three of the traditional instruments in here alongside the harsh vocals. This was an interesting choice, a merger of worlds that we hadn't seen elsewhere on the album. The folk instrumentation with the harsh vocals. I don't know what to make of this artistically, but I will just say that sonically this was a joy to listen to. It's one of my favorite things to hear in the realm of folk metal is abrasive vocals against non-abrasive music. I think that when it comes to harsh vocals, metal pretty much has its flag deeply planted in this hill. You don't hear death growls, black metal shrieks, even post-hardcore screams too often outside of the more aggressive styles of music. There is a novelty to hearing somebody screaming alongside pop music or folk music or anything acoustic. It's just something that we don't get to hear too often. I think that novelty aside, though, there is a lot of interesting ground to explore in this realm. And I think that the opening vocal section of track 6 is a really good showcasing of that. While also, I think, being thematically appropriate. Again, don't have lyrical context, but this does seem to be a transition song, thematically and atmospherically, to move from the rage, the pain, the sorrow of everything else on the album into this brighter, more positive future. I have no idea how I've moved the microphone away from in front of me to this little disc on my shirt, and I somehow still manage to hit it sometimes. I'm sorry for that. Back to the poignant observation, though. We are taking that metallic anger and pain in the vocals and pairing that with the calmer, intricate, beautiful instrumentation going on here. Now, granted, we do get right back into that metal stuff, so I don't know how accurate this interpretation is, but I do like that imagery there. There is still pain, but we're trying to move on from that. After this, though, we do enter into a bunch of more traditional metal ideas. And we kind of remove some of the more exclusively beautiful sections to focus on things that are extreme, gnarly metal stuff. What I do like, though, is that even within this metal framework, we do find gorgeous ideas. In fact, when we hit the middle of the song, we head into some solos and duets that I absolutely enjoyed. In fact, the way that the two guitars play off of each other for a good chunk between minutes 3 and 5 of track 6 is just fantastic. I had mentioned the sorrowful wailing and mourning going on the left side versus the chaotic frenzy of 16th notes going on the right side. Those were happening simultaneously, and that was before moving into some very traditional heavy metal guitar duets that I thought were just very cool. I mean, that was just really great movement in all of that. The melodic flow and storytelling through these ideas worked very well, and it was done through a melodic lens, still taking that aggression but finding something gorgeous out of it. Granted, there was like some full-on black metal blast beat stuff somewhere like pocketed into all this too. It wasn't like it was purely gorgeous, but to me this song feels like of being two worlds. The grief and pain that you feel and the destination that you want to go in. You know that these emotions are valid, but that they're not going to take you on a path that's necessarily where you want to go. And you have to hone them down into appropriate capacities of these feelings. You know, you can certainly take pain and anguish and develop something positive out of it, but if you really focus in on that and allow it to develop into a rage, it usually will not take you to a good place. And so I think a lot of this song, the transitions between tracks 4 into 5 in the intro of 6, into a lot of the metallic sections of 6, winding up in the outro of 6 into track 7, is really this transformation of taking this pain and this hurt and doing something positive out of it, not allowing it to consume and to dictate where you go, but never forgetting it either, about being responsible with this trauma. And that's a really weird phrase. As soon as I started saying it, I was like, don't finish that sentence. It is a weird phrase, but I do think it's important. Trauma can be held over us, whether it's a singular trauma and you allow it, not necessarily allow it to define your life, but it just does, you know? And it takes a lot of work, both from yourself and from those around you, having good support networks to allow yourself and train yourself to do things that aren't controlled by your trauma. But I think it's even more when it's a collective trauma, something done to an entire group of people. It takes more to steer that ship in the right direction. Especially something that I had not learned of this Nanking Massacre prior to today, but just reading about it, this isn't just a traumatic event. This was intense, wildly intense. and to find a way, like I said, to acknowledge it, but to grow out of it in a positive way, to not let it define you as a nation, as a group of people. I really think that's what a lot of this back half of this album is about, musically at least. They do a fantastic job of crafting something beautiful out of something that is painful and sorrowful, and trying to balance all of this. I'm going to read some lyrics for track 6. We'll see if that develops my thoughts on the themes of this at all, and then we're going to wrap this video up. We do have a time skip in here. I guessed that accurately from track 7, although honestly it makes a lot of sense given the beginning of track 2 about someone who slips into a dream and remembers the past as if they were there. So this idea of returning to the future is something that's kind of already baked into the song, or baked into the album. It talks though about growth, regrowth, healing. It says green water sways white sails. A cup of wine intoxicates the beautiful, warms the heart. Flutes circling, phoenixes dancing, trees stand in the sky. Long wails, hundreds of feet, golden flags, jade drums, they drive the tower ship. Spring rain turns to autumn wind, crosses the sea, it changes the world. It talks about all of this growth, evolution, changing of the tides of the time. He says, though, that there's desolate graves, thousands of miles of wolves and vultures who eat, dirty temples and orchids, officials and laws that are corrupt, bleak walls, rope clothing. It says, what joy is there in life? What peace is there in death? That somehow, after all this time, there has been growth out of this, but life is still kind of not great. Seems to be a confusion about where we went after this event happened. They seem to put a very direct cause on this, though. It says 1,000 years have passed in a snap, and we stand on the Naihe Bridge. It says, do you remember that there was a lonely person, silently, without tears, staining his green shirt? It basically says, do you remember the massacre from 1,000 years ago? It almost, to me, feels as if he blames the forgetting of the past, maybe of this specific moment, but maybe of our collective past. That we've allowed things to be the way they are because we forgot who fought for us so hardly to get to a place like we are today. That we could be in a much better place if we were like those who came before us, fought for freedoms. Instead, we live in bleak walls. The vultures eat well. Our officials and politicians are corrupt. It's a different kind of negativity, a different kind of grief and pain that we live in today. He says, though, that when we meet again in the future, it will not be the face of the old friend. Instead, lonely, shadows wandering, beard and hair withering, bones and muscles knotted. It's only the heart that is as strong as a rock. And I don't quite know how to interpret this. I wonder if this is another situation that, like the final stanza of track 2, Google's translation just doesn't quite capture the meaning. It might be a literal translation, but it's missing the heart of the words. I kind of wish that there was an official translation for the Karma and Wangchuan River, much like there was the song. Because while I didn't have a lot of new appreciation for a better translation, it did help me with a specific part. And while I didn't have any issues with the Karma, I still, maybe there is something I missed from that. Maybe there's something I'm missing here. Maybe it's not just a coincidence that the song is my favorite track on the album. It's also the one that I had the most understanding of lyrically, although it still is, I think, the best composition on the album, too. But it puts a different spin on the bookends of track 6 because lyrically it's still upset. There's still disappointment, anger here. It's not a positive song. Even seems to have a little bit of resentment for those 1,000 years in the future. It seems that the peace and calm that's presented in the intro and outro of 6 and the entirety of track 7, what I interpreted as a positive, is bittersweet to our narrator. A type of peace, but at what cost? What elements are just being excused or forgotten? Like track 6 says, he looks around and still sees forces working against most people. It might not be the utter and easily distinguishable destruction of the massacre, but people aren't still, they're still not living quite free, are they? At least that's what I get out of it. Again, this is based off of a Google translated set of lyrics, and I don't quite grasp the ending, so I'm hoping that there's an element here that I'm just missing. Someone else has a different interpretation, or maybe you understand Chinese and can translate more better. That's some great English for it. Could translate better for me. The lyrics are at Metal Archives. That's where I found the original lyrics. Maybe there's something here at the end with a better translation that would help. Still, though, I think this is one of my more memorable and certainly, I don't know if I'd use the word favorites. I don't know that I would want to come back to the album, even as much as I loved the song. That's a track I'm still going to come back to. But it's definitely an album in the extreme realm of metal that I hold in high regard. And for that, I appreciate it being brought to my attention. And I hope that if you enjoy this song, this album, or maybe even if this is the first time you've heard it, that you've learned something today. I know I learned. Oh, so I still, how it's so tiny. I learned something today, and that's awesome as always. So these are my thoughts on Black Kirin's Nanking Massacre. Let me know well, Nanking Massacre is how it's written on the album, even though, as I said, that's a bit more of an outdated way of spelling it and saying it. Still, my thoughts on it. What are yours? Did you enjoy it? Is there anything that stood out to you? Anything that you'd like to add on to what I said or correct me on? Maybe you have your own interpretation or perspective on it. Please put all of that and any other thoughts you might have into the comment section. Above that, in the description box, you'll find a link to Linktree. Takes you here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. That wraps it up for today, but I'll be back tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, 3 p.m. UTC. We're going to do a live stream. It goes for about 2 hours. We're going to check out 11 tracks, I think. Is tomorrow the third or fourth Sunday? Oh, yeah, it's the fourth Sunday. Okay, so we only have 9 songs lined up, but I think we're going to check out some tracks from Ozzy and Black Sabbath to wrap up the stream because he passed this week. I mean, that's just, I don't know. It's kind of, it still doesn't it still doesn't feel real, right? So we're gonna honor him with a couple of tracks at the end of the stream as well. So we are going to bring it up to like 11 or 12 songs. Anyways, it goes for like 2 hours. Dude, if you can make it, I highly suggest it. It's just a really good time. We chat, we listen to music. It's good conversation, good company, and good tunes, honestly. So it's always worthwhile if you have the opportunity to. Otherwise, as usual, I'll be back Monday, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time as usual. We'll check out some music then. All right, until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.